Welcome to Becoming Untriggered, a podcast brought to you by psychodynamic coaches and parents of three, Lavinia Brown and Andrew Lynn.
Together we normalise and unpack common challenges faced by couples and parents, explore how these could be symptoms of unprocessed trauma, and support you with the tried and tested tools for you to show up as the mum or dad, partner, and person you deserve to be. Welcome to Becoming Untriggered podcast. Today we're going to talk about estrangement, what it is, why it may or may not be a necessary part of your healing process, why you might need it, how it might help your healing process, how it might be difficult, and the challenges that both men and women face when choosing to estrange themselves. And that's where I want to start, because this is something that can both happen to you and it can be a part of your process that you decide to do to someone else. So in a nutshell, it's about cutting down the contact that you already have with your parents or primary caregivers. That might be cutting down in terms of from once a day, more than once a day, to perhaps twice a day, to perhaps once a week. It could be cutting it down to twice a week. It could be cutting it down to once a month. And estrangement is the end of that spectrum. It's cutting it down to no contact at all. So we're going to talk about why you might want to do that, why it might be really painful if you're on the receiving end of that. And Andrew's going to start off by talking about the process.
Well, I want to talk a bit, but generally about estrangement, because I think it's something that's a bit in the zeitgeist at the moment. I spoke to somebody at the gym about it the other day whose daughter has cut off contact from him. And it was certainly a part of my process where I severed ties with my family and got some distance, and then we'd come back together. So it doesn't have to be final, but it's certainly very common and part of the healing process, because all of the relationships are a reflection of who we are. Our relationship with our family, our relationships with our friends, our relationship with our partner. And when you go through this process of healing, you're changing yourself. All of your relationships do change. And it's actually the family, our birth family, are the relationships that we don't choose. And we're forced to face them. We're forced to deal with them through this healing process. There's a couple of things. Number one, it's when do you bring this to the family? When do you communicate this, your process and your truth? And is often a reflection of how the process goes, whether you can work through it together or whether there is a long-term estrangement.
That's not part of the process for me and my women. I specifically underline, actually, because it's always a worry before people start this process. Am I going to have to tell my mum? Am I going to have to tell my parents? Am I going to have to bring them into my process? Because that's terrifying to some women. And I said, no, you don't need to tell anyone that you are doing this. And actually, I discourage you from sharing, definitely at the beginning, less so at the middle, but you've got to be grounded enough in who you are. The whole process of this is, as you said, to disentangle yourself from your parents' beliefs, values, feelings. And we often don't realize how entangled we are, how enmeshed we are with our parents until we do this process. And what you'll find is, just as you said, when you change, the other person has to change. It'll either break up and they won't want to see you anymore, which is very rare, because normally we're talking about our parents, but if we're talking about a relationship, for example, or it will change because you're in a dynamic. And I always think of I don't know if you did this in physics, you had the little blue clip and you had the little red clip, and it creates an electrical circuit, right? It goes round and round in a circle. If you move one of the clips, there is no circuit anymore. There can't be. It's been broken. So that other person, to get back onto the electrical circuit, if they want to, is going to have to move too. I believe, and I've seen countless times, and it's almost like a miracle. It's almost magic. How has this person changed when I didn't even tell them that I was working on shifting my resentment and my anger towards them? But I don't think you have to bring it to your parents in any formal way. But you were saying that for men, maybe it is. I think it
comes out sometimes. I don't think it's more important. I think sometimes it comes out too early in the process. So you're dealing with it, you're processing your anger, you're opening some of the boxes of the repressed emotion you've got. And then suddenly it's Thanksgiving, or suddenly your parents are coming over in 1 week. And you have the best intentions. Okay, it's going to be normal. I'm just going to get through it. But then your mum says something, or your dad says something. And then I've had the example recently where people have stood up and said, well, this is what I'm doing at the moment. And this is what you did to me. And this. Yeah. That can lead to estrangement, but it's not the healthy or natural part of this process because you're approaching it too early. So the timing isn't right.
But let's not call it estrangement, because estrangement is the end stop of what is actually a spectrum. I think what we're talking about, or what you just mentioned, is getting space whilst you're doing your process, which I think is absolutely necessary, because my analogy that I always use is it's like you've got a cut. Your trauma is a cut. If you keep putting that cut under the tap being your parents, that cut, it will heal eventually because the body is amazing. Everything heals in time. But you're really slowing down that process of healing. Every time you get a scab on that cut, every time it closes up a little bit, putting it under the tap washes that scab away, opens it up. It needs to be dry. It needs to be clean. It needs to have time to get a scab. And once that scab has come off in its own time, you've got a small scar. That scar is pretty strong. That's not going to open up again. So this is what I say to my clients. Get as much space as you feel comfortable with at the beginning. I think for a lot of women-mother connections can be very intense, the negative way of describing it would be suffocating. Many of my clients have mothers that call them many times a day, or they call them many times a day. And it's often even unconscious. We have to talk about why. It's about becoming really conscious of how involved you are in that dynamic, the blue clip, the red clip. And is it necessary? What are you getting out of it? And where could you get that elsewhere? Because often my clients aren't getting anything out of it. They come off the call and they're really stressed, and yet they keep going back. So for my clients, it's about dialing down that contact. Maybe it's from twice a day to once a day, so that they can remember who they are outside of that dynamic, which sounds really obvious and silly, but it's huge. If you're in contact with your mother all the time, then it's very likely that your inner child is alive all the time. And your inner child should not be alive all the time. Then you're not in your adult self. But until you've got that space, you have no idea what it feels like to be in your adult. And that's why I recommend it.
Yeah, I think that is huge for your clients. I think men are slightly different. I don't think we tend to have the level of physical intensity of communication and relationship with our parents. We tend to have just flown and gone and doing our own thing. But there's no less of an impact from the childhood, obviously. So I think the whole estrangement thing isn't about necessarily getting space on a daily basis or changing the level of contact with the parents, but it is about shifting the perspective of the relationship, being prepared to accept the reality of your childhood and break the unconscious bonds that there are between the child and the parent.
For women, it's very intense. Intense is exactly the word. It's dependent. Utterly dependent, because the inner child is dependent. Of course, the inner child needs their parent for emotional, mental, spiritual, physical support. But an adult doesn't. Obviously, the mother is getting something out of a relationship where the child is dependent on her. It's a very unhealthy parenting dynamic. Like I said, it's about cutting it down a bit. When you've cut it down a bit, you've got a bit more space to feel into who you are as a mother, right? Your children need you. Your mother is an adult. Your children are children who are dependent for good reason. Your mother isn't. And from there, you can start to lay healthy boundaries, because from that space, you realize that actually the relationship isn't healthy. So we have a whole session on that, giving them the courage to do it. And I say, so how did it go? Because you cut down to once a week. How did it go? Oh, yeah, it was fine.
There's a good chance that the actual mother is grateful as well. There's a good chance that it's dysfunctional from both sides. The mother thinks the child needs it, so she's there every day talking to her.
Yeah, I had this with one client actually, whose parents came round every single Sunday night for dinner. I said, that's cool. That sounds nice. Do you enjoy it? No, I hate it. Okay, why is that then? Well, the kids don't like sitting at table. They usually don't like what we've made to eat because it's a special meal. My partner's really awkward and I just really don't like it. I have to hug my mum. I don't want to hug my mum. So anyway, we unpacked it, and especially the hugging thing. And I was like, if you don't want to hug your mum, don't hug your mother. Do something else. Go, hey, or, hang back. See if you can stand behind your husband. Anyway, we talked about things she can do to break that particular bond that she wasn't enjoying. And it turned out after they'd done a couple of dinners where she hadn't had to hug her and say, I love you and have the special meal, she felt more loving and more connected. And the relationship felt more meaningful because it turned out the mother didn't really want to hug either. The whole thing was this theatrical display of what a mother-daughter relationship should look like. And when she stepped out of that dynamic, again, moving that blue clip or the red clip, her mother was able to be more herself. So I think you're absolutely right. It worked from both sides. And now they've got an amazing relationship because there's no expectations on either side of what their relationship should look like and how close they should be. They're able to be themselves.
The difference for men is normally, or the dysfunction for men a lot of the times from the external, from the family, comes in via the relationship with the partner. So a lot of the boundaries that are required from the man's point of view are not necessarily between him and his mother, although that relationship changes. A lot of the time, the boundary comes in between the mother and the family, because that's where the dysfunctions come in. It's like a triangular dysfunction. And the boundaries that need to be put up are often not just protection of him, but protection of the partner. Sometimes it's choosing the partner. Sometimes it's putting boundaries in place. Sometimes it's fully investing in his family. Like, this is how we do things. This is what we want for our children.
And you're saying that doesn't happen, or he doesn't realize that that's what he needs until he has a committed relationship.
He doesn't realize what he needs often until the light is shone on the trauma dynamic or the dysfunction of the relationship between him and his mother.
That's shit. So again, the woman is going, hey, this isn't working. Can you look at your stuff?
Well, yeah, a lot of the time that happens, but a lot of the time it's just part of the dynamic. It's not even necessarily that the woman is saying you need to look at it. The woman is part of the trauma dynamic. But don't forget, obviously, the man's part of the woman's trauma dynamic all the time because he has to pick up the pieces of the 3 phone calls a day from the mother-in-law. For example, with us, I didn't necessarily have a massive trauma bond with your mother, let's say. Your relationship with your mother was very strong and she came into our family via you. Whereas with my mother, it's slightly different. There is more of a close relationship between you and her. I think there is like a competition between the partner in the relationship and the mother. That comes from the man not being fully in his man. That comes from the man being in his inner child. And therefore he's got a relationship with the mother, which is often an inner child relationship. And then he's got a relationship with the partner, which is an adult relationship. Because as a man, as you get into your middle age, as you get into being a father and a partner, you don't need your inner child being around. There's no use for your inner child. So if there is an inner child, it's very likely that that's going to come up via the relationship with your mother.
Like I said earlier, it's very difficult for a woman. I think it's much harder than for a man because you might have the extreme case of these dependent relationships where the mother has created dependency, emotional, what we talked about earlier, the agony of breaking up. But there's also a slightly more subtle one, which I think probably all women, many women suffer from, and that's the guilt. Women have this with men and women, so their fathers and their mothers or whatever primary caregiver they had in their life. It can feel really naughty and bad to not be that good little girl who's the good daughter, who's in contact, who cheers them up, who buys presents, receives presents, does that family thing. I think women carry that expectation for the family of what a family should look like. That's why Thanksgiving is such a big deal. It's why Christmas is such a big deal. We feel we need it to look perfect. the house needs to be clean in a certain way so that we can show our parents-in-law and our parents that we're adults. We can keep house. We need to be able to cook an amazing meal because, hey, we're also good cooks because we're adults now. It's a real thing. It's pretty awful, actually. And not being there in that way can bring up a lot of guilt. And I know I really found this difficult. I used to call my mother when I was living abroad every day or many times a week at least. And they were awful. She would literally just offload her stuff. I was a therapist, just listening. I remember holding the phone away from me, often thinking, oh my God. And yet I'd keep doing it because I felt that was my role. That's what daughters do. So unpacking where that guilt's come from and understanding that every relationship should be give and take, apart from the one with your children. Your children are allowed to take without giving, and we know that. That's why it's hard. But every single other relationship in your life should be give and take, even with your parents. You are not there to be there for them, to give, to support, to listen, to help. Of course, that's part of your relationship. But if that comes with, and I always talk about this, a manic sense of need, urgency, guilt, obligation, duty, that's not you. That's your inner child. And you are too tethered. So again, getting that space so that you can unpack that guilt, feel the guilt by itself, because when you're not speaking to them, you're going to want to. And that's when I say, right, tap into that feeling. Why do you want to speak to your mother when you get the urge? Is it because you really want to share the love and the excitement of what's going on in your life? If it is, amazing. If it isn't, don't call. And usually it isn't. There is literally no point in having a call because you have it penciled in every Saturday and you don't really want to do it and it goes on for too long and the children get bored. There's no point. You are showing up with a bit of resentment, a bit of boredom. Your parents will feel that.
You think it's like a program of how you were taught to receive love? So you had to basically show up for your parents. You had to listen to your parents. You had to make them feel happy to receive love. So you think, oh, if I give them a call, if I do that thing, then I'll get the love I'm looking for.
Probably. I mean, that's why the whole mother imprint exists, right? It is passed down through the mother to the daughter, to the daughter, to the daughter, to the daughter. So yeah, I think many of our mothers are wounded because we live in a patriarchy, partly because we are meant to be the caretakers of the family, because we shoulder so much of the expectation of what a family should look like. Men don't. And that's really, really hard. So that's why it's so important that women do this work to unpack that and break that generational trauma, those dysfunctional family patterns. So I think the whole estrangement thing, the whole no contact, and I know it very well. I've done it twice, once for 2 years and once for 1 year. And I never tell anyone that they should do that, but I do encourage them to be consciously in contact. When you're in contact, it needs to come from you. It needs to come from your heart. It needs to come from a good place. For me, that break helped me to set the boundaries that I needed to know who I was, to be able to be in conscious contact. And from that point onwards, it was about being the good daughter in a way that felt right for me. Because there's also no point going no contact and then you spend hours every day feeling guilty. It's stupid. I mean, that doesn't work either. So it's finding that sweet spot. How can you cut down the contact with your parents, either one, so that it feels good when you speak to them, so that you feel like you're being a good daughter, and the impact of that contact doesn't then have repercussions for how you show up as a mother or a partner? That's difficult to find, and everyone can find it. And I would encourage everyone to do that journey.
I think it's interesting because in all of my experiences with men, when they've been through this process, there is a desire to bring their truth to their parents. I think pretty much all of the men I've worked with have ended up telling their parents about their experience as a child. I definitely didn't do it in the best way because I did a lot of it on social media, which is actually a really bad way to do it. But I want to talk a little bit about that because it is difficult and there are good ways and there are bad ways to do it. I think going through your process and healing and integrating your inner child and getting rid of any anger or sadness or grief about those experiences and getting some distance from it and recognizing that everyone did their best and it's generational trauma and all those things. And then being able to come back into the family. And I think there's a couple of reasons why people do it. Number one, they want to be seen for who they are, but also I think they want to help. I think they do want to bring light onto the situation.
I always say if you need to be seen, don't do it because that's your inner child. If you're going to share what your process has been, it has to be showing up as an adult with no expectations of an answer, of a change in circumstance, because many of my clients' parents don't change, or they do change, but some don't. Mine certainly didn't.
I think you definitely can't expect change, but I think probably the best case scenario is a shift, is a change. The next best thing is just to be recognized, even if you don't need it as a person, as an adult, to be recognized that, yeah, I see that was difficult.
But you might never get that.
Doesn't matter if you get it. You can forgive your parents for what your childhood experience was. And as an adult, and then if you go to them and you say, look, this was my experience. I've done this healing journey. I've done it for my family. I've done it for me. It's a really positive experience. This is what I learned from it. Then if your parents go, no, you're wrong. That's not how it was. That's not how it happened. You can then make a decision. There's no benefit to me, this person being in my life.
Yeah. So the problem is for the parents experiencing that estrangement, like you said, the guy in the gym. So maybe it is more of a tool. And I'm not saying one needs to get prepared for estrangement, but it's not going to shock you if it's a process that you've set up from the very beginning. We need to give our children spaces. We're coming across it now because 2 of our children are teenagers. They need space. They are differentiating themselves from us. That can be expressed in quite aggressive, not necessarily kind ways sometimes. We can either take that personally or we give them the space to do what they need to do. Estrangement or going no contact or cutting down contact is the same thing, right? I can't expect my tween, I can't expect my teen, I can't expect my adult child to want to have a relationship with me. If they do, amazing. Wow, incredible. And I look forward to it and I'm excited by it. But I have no right to expect that from them. I will have given them trauma that they will need to make their way through in whatever way feels good to them, just as my tween and my teens need to process their day or whatever it is. And I have to give them the space to do that. Again, I think that's back to the inner child. The inner child is the only person that needs other people to be, act, say, do things in a certain way for you to feel safe. If you need your children to behave in a certain way for you to feel safe, then your inner child is the parent there.
And you'll know, depending on how you react to your child, if you can take what they give to you and still give from a place of love, then you're doing the job as a parent. But if you receive what they give and then you go defensive and then you protect yourself and then it's part of your story and it's part of your inner child. And therefore there is work for you to do. Because it is always our job as parents, of me as a parent, to create the environment that the kids want to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
I don't see it as their responsibility to come back and see us. And
yes, and I would hate them to do it out of obligation. I think it's important to bring in maybe the relationship aspect as well, because since we work with couples as well, it's acknowledging, it's doing the work so that you're able to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge how you might have fucked up. Because we all do, whether that's in a relationship with your partner, whether that's as a parent, whether that's as being a bad friend. Being able to go there and feel the pain and shame and guilt maybe of having shown up in a way that wasn't ideal and work through that. We're not talking about spiraling into a pit of I'm a crappy person for hours, but acknowledging it and moving through it with the love and compassion of your inner parent. That's what our children need. And if you can do that, even if your children do go no contact, you'll be fine. Because you know how to manage it. You're not expecting it to end or to be a certain way. You're just there for your kids.
The irony is, to enable you to do that, you need to love yourself, right? You need to be okay with yourself. You need to have done the work yourself. To recognize that you're not perfect, but you did a good job. and you're enough. That's how you're able to receive criticism from everybody if you don't take it as a rocking of your foundation of self. But the irony is, if you do that, you're much more likely to give your kids the experience that they'll want to keep coming back to.
So estrangement is something that can happen to you, as we've just touched on. Your children may need the space that they require in order to process the ways in which you weren't there for them. Hopefully that won't happen because you'll be doing that all the way through your parenting journey. So it won't have to be so extreme. And it can be a necessary part of your process to get that space. Remember who you are outside of your parental influence. And from that space, be able to lay down the boundaries that you need to stay in that place, a mother, a partner, an adult, not an inner child. And for me, again, just underlining it, no relationship should be all give. If you find that you're in a relationship like that with anyone in your life, take some time to examine why. What is that bond that is keeping you in that circuit that is not serving you? What are you looking for in it? And where could you find that elsewhere?
And I think for men, actually, as part of their process, it's about consciously choosing their partner and their family over their parents, which is really hard for a lot of men. We're seeing it a lot at the moment, and it's definitely part of my process. And then putting healthy boundaries up between your family and your parents, if you need to. You can still have lots of contact, you can still have lots of love, you can still have a great relationship, but your family is the priority, and your external family, your birth family, is there to support that and be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, in essence, there's one set of people that need you, your children. That has to be where your energetic focus, emotional focus goes.
If what we discussed was helpful, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. For more of the same, check out my social media, The Inner Child Healing Expert, or to work with me, go to laviniabrown.com.
You can find me on andrewlynn.net or Life Coach for Dads on Instagram. We work with both individuals and couples. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, please reach out. Thanks for listening.